So why do we want to culture live foods? Well, these days there are very good, excuse me, very good commercial fish foods on the market, but you just can't beat live foods. Um, it promotes better health, faster, larger growth, often better coloration, stimulates breeding. It better emulates nature. Fish just love live foods. And sustainable cultures saves money. Good quality fish foods are not cheap. Culturing whiteworms. For containers, almost any plastic container with a lid works well. You might even use a styrofoam cooler size. These happen to be shoebox size, um, but larger bins are can also be used. You want to keep the bedding probably around no deeper than 6 inches or so because it's easier to work with. Ventilation is important. These particular bins are not airtight, but certainly if they were airtight, you would need to have holes for ventilation. I have holes in these anyway. Here, there's larger bins, larger sterilite bins being used. Um, for bedding media, potting soil, coconut fiber, a combination of the two. You could even use, on a larger scale, you could even use sphagnum peat moss and composted cow manure. I would stay away from garden soil unless you sterilize. And even then, you want to mix well with something that makes the bedding more fluffy and airy. I'm using a grain mix for food, for worm food. This is a mixture of whole wheat flour, powdered chicken starter, cornmeal, and pea powder in a 4:1:1 ratio. You can use crushed fish flake food, and nutritional yeast works. For feeding or prior to feeding, I always fluff the bedding. Okay, so when I fluff the bedding, I'm actually taking the tongs and using them like a spade. And the fluffing process allows me to check the population density, the moisture content of the bedding, and it aerates the bedding so the worms have more air down under. Look at all those worms. Thanks, Mike. Now, I used to use cut up pieces of bread, but then I decided why, and I just use whole slices of bread. I slather on yogurt spread. This is a yogurt made from whole milk with live cultures. And that's important because although the worms process organic matter, they actually derive their nutrition from protozoa and bacteria. And this particular yogurt has 6 beneficial yogurt bacteria. I then sprinkle with the grain mix and then spritz with water. Alternatively, or actually every other day or so, every other feeding or so, I will just sprinkle the grain mix and right on top of the bedding and spritz with water. This method, though, probably that amount would be consumed in 24 hours, whereas the bread, yogurt, and grain mix typically can go 2 to 3 days. I then cover with paper towel. The paper towel, it's a double layer of paper towel, goes on dry, but it often comes out very damp, if not wet. And what this does is it helps to moderate and control moisture. Here I'm harvesting. There are those that will wait until the worms self-harvest. That means that the bedding in time, the bedding becomes sour. When you think about it, I mean, the worms are defecating in the bedding, and eventually it gets used up, and they're no longer happy with it, and so they will evacuate on their own. I don't wait until it's that long. When I notice that the population is very dense and or the bedding is becoming dense, I will harvest by placing on a heating pad that's set on high. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour, and the worms will evacuate to escape the heat, and I will collect them cleanly, as you'll see here. And here are the worms that I've collected from that particular bin. A lot of worms. So I have a lot of fish, but when there's an excess of worms, I will freeze the worms that you just saw in that deli cup with water. And I'm using these silicone ice cube trays because they're much easier to work with. You know, with a regular hard ice cube tray, you run under hot water. These are so flexible that the frozen cubes just pop right out. Potential pests. You can have mites, fungus gnats, fruit flies, soldier flies. Basically, any critter that enjoys moist bedding with food. One of the things you can do to prevent this is to put your bin inside of pillowcase or similar material so that you still have good airflow, but it seals the bins to keep the pests out. Here's an invention I kind of came up with. I had an issue with gnats at one time, and I found that a media bag fit quite nicely in one of the attachments of my shop vac, and so I was actually able to collect them. I'm actually looking forward to see if I might collect fruit flies from my compost bin. And that's pretty much it. That's how we culture